Long before the world was tamed, when stars still trembled with new light, two legends met above the ruins of war. Eärendil, the morning star, and Ancalagon, the last flame of Morgoth. Their clash was more than a battle, it was creation itself holding its breath. The light of a Silmaril burned against the black fire of the Dark Lord's might, and the sky became their arena. Mountains crumbled beneath their shadows, seas rose to swallow the land, and the stars themselves dimmed in awe and terror. For days the heavens burned, starlight against shadow, hope against despair. And when Ancalagon finally fell, the world was remade in the silence that followed. Ages later, mortals still look to the morning star and whisper his name, not knowing they gaze upon the memory of the battle that ended an age and reshaped the fate of Arda forever. Chapter 1: Shadows over Angband. The skies over Angband were no longer merely dark. They had become a living shadow, a smothering veil that stretched from the peaks of Thangorodrim to the furthest reaches of Beleriand. Smoke curled in coils as thick as serpents, and the sun's light, once a gentle blessing upon the land, was blotted, leaving the world beneath bathed in a perpetual twilight of fear. Even the seas seemed to recoil, their waves churning with unease, as if the waters themselves could sense the coming storm. From the depths of the fortress, long sealed by the deeds of Morgoth, a rumble rose, vibrating through rock and air alike. Then came a sound to chill the marrow, the beating of wings, so vast, so heavy, they seemed to command the very heavens. Ancalagon the Black had arisen. His scales, dark as the pits of Angband itself, shimmered with a heat that warped the air. Eyes like molten iron glared down upon the lands, twin flames that burned with the pride of the first Dark Lord. Smoke hissed from his nostrils, fire licked the sky, and the peaks beneath him groaned under the weight of what was not merely flesh, but a living tempest of wrath and destruction. Below, the remnants of Dorthonion and the plains of Ardgalen quivered, scarred by years of war, yet holding fast against despair. Yet all who dwelt there, elf and man alike, felt an instinctive fear, primal and absolute. Eagles that once soared unchallenged faltered in their flight, their keen cries swallowed by the roar of the dragon. The land itself seemed to cower, knowing the shadow of Morgoth had grown to unimaginable breadth and might. High above the chaos, the winds themselves turned traitor, buffeting the mountains, tearing at clouds, and twisting ash into ghostly forms. And yet, through the suffocating darkness, a silver gleam pierced the gloom, a tiny light, bright and unyielding, drawing the gaze of all who watched. It was a glimmer of hope, fragile yet undeniable, signaling that even in the face of terror, the courage of one could defy the dominion of darkness. That light was Vingalot, fair and steadfast, cutting a path through the storm. Its sails shimmered like threads of moonlight, and the air around it seemed to shimmer with the promise of endurance. Aboard her stood Eärendil the Mariner, a figure of calm amid the tumult. In his hands he bore the Silmaril, and in its fire burned not only the captured sun, but the hopes of elves and men. He gazed downward at the lands scarred by centuries of war, yet his eyes were fixed upon the greater threat above. "By the stars that guide us," he whispered, voice low yet firm, "I sail not for myself, but for all who cling to light. Let my hand be steady, let courage be my shield." From Angband, a tremor of awareness passed through the ancient halls, and Ancalagon's gaze fell upon the shining intruder. His roar split the sky, a terrible herald of flame and ruin. Yet the light of the Silmaril did not falter. It blazed with a warmth that seemed to repel the shadows, a signal that even the greatest might could not silence all hope. The world held its breath. Mountains quivered, rivers recoiled, and trees bent as though in reverence or terror. The first strike had not yet come, yet the sky itself seemed to know that a battle unlike any other in the ages of Arda was about to unfold. This was no mere skirmish of beasts or men. It was a confrontation written into the very fate of the world, a reckoning of shadow against light, pride against courage, terror against hope. And so, as the winds shrieked and smoke coiled like serpents around the shattered peaks, Ancalagon rose higher, and Vingalot pressed onward, a gleaming point of defiance. The heavens themselves seemed to bend, and in that pregnant moment, the tale of titans, of fire and light, of doom and salvation began. Chapter 2: The Mariner of Light. The stars above Beleriand, long witnesses to the deeds of elves and men, seemed dimmed beneath the smoke of Angband. Yet Eärendil saw them still, faint guides that whispered of distant hope. The wind tore at Vingalot's silver sails, buffeting the ship as if seeking to throw it from its course. But the mariner's hand was steady, and his heart steadier still. He had borne the Silmaril across seas of shadow before, yet never against a terror such as this. Never against the mightiest of Morgoth's creatures, Ancalagon the Black. Eärendil's gaze swept over the lands below. Forests that had once sung with the laughter of children now lay blackened and hollow. Rivers ran thick with ash and flame. Yet beyond the devastation, the faint glimmers of life endured. Elves stirring in hidden glades, men holding fast to the remnants of their cities, the few survivors of the long wars that had scarred the First Age. Each glimmer was a reason to sail on, each heartbeat a challenge to the darkness. He thought of his father, Tuor, and the words that had guided him even in the depths of despair. Hope is the shield of the valiant, and the courage to endure the night is the light that outshines all shadows. The thought strengthened him, lending a steady rhythm to his breath, a rhythm that matched the wings of Vingalot as they beat against the wind. "The Silmaril," he murmured, lifting the jewel so its fire caught the fractured sky. "Let your light burn, not only for me, but for all who believe that even the smallest spark may hold back the abyss." The jewel flared, a miniature sun, burning away the shadows that pressed too close, casting long shafts of light across the trembling clouds. And then he saw it. Ancalagon, coiled like a storm incarnate, rising above the shattered peaks of Thangorodrim. The dragon's scales glinted with molten heat, each beat of his wings stirring currents of fire that swept across the horizon. Smoke and flame billowed from his jaws, and his roar rolled across the lands like thunder split by lightning. Yet even in the face of such fury, Eärendil felt no hesitation, only resolve. He remembered the legends, the tales of the elder days, how dragons had sundered kingdoms, burned forests, and struck terror into the hearts of men and elves alike. Yet never before had a dragon faced the light of the Silmaril, nor the courage of one who sailed not for glory, but for the survival of hope itself. The wind carried a whisper to him, almost like a voice from the past. The greatest darkness may yet be overcome by the smallest light, if it burns steadfast. Eärendil tightened his grip on the Silmaril. Then let me be that light, he thought, and let the darkness see what end awaits those who would think themselves eternal. Below, the lands shook as the shadow of the dragon passed, yet the light of Vingalot flared brighter, cutting through smoke and fire like a lance of pure brilliance. Eärendil steered with precision, weaving through currents of ash and fire, his mind focused, body poised for the coming clash. He could feel the heat of Ancalon's breath, the trembling of the air beneath the dragon's wings, the weight of history pressing down, as if the First Age itself waited for the outcome of this confrontation. And in that moment, Eärendil knew. This was no longer a voyage of seas and stars. This was a battle for the fate of Beleriand, a duel that would echo across all ages, a confrontation that would test courage, skill, and the very endurance of hope. Every choice he made, every turn of Vingalot, every flare of the Silmaril, carried the weight of worlds. As the mariner drew closer, the heavens themselves seemed to tremble, clouds twisting and roiling under the shadow of the dragon. Light and darkness held a breathless balance, the scales tipping with every heartbeat. The moment before the first strike was a stillness unlike any Eärendil had ever known, the pause before inevitability, the hush before the storm of fate. And then, with a roar that shook the clouds to their roots, Ancalagon lunged, wings unfurled like night itself, and the duel that would be sung of for all ages began. Chapter 3: The Duel of Titans, First Clash. The air trembled, thick with ash and the scent of burning stone, as Ancalagon the Black unfurled his colossal wings and descended like a living storm. Clouds twisted in his wake, torn asunder by the force of his flight, and the winds carried the roar of his fury across the lands below. Every beat of his wings struck mountains like hammers, and rivers recoiled beneath the heat that radiated from his scales. Above the shattered plains, Eärendil held Vingalot steady, the Silmaril blazing like a captured sun. His hands were firm, his heart a drum of courage, and his mind focused with the clarity of one who carries the hopes of many. He had sailed through storms before, but none like this. None had ever matched a terror forged in the first days of the world. And yet, fear found no place in his soul, only resolve. "By the stars that guide us," he whispered, voice firm against the roar of the tempest, "let the light endure." The first clash was sudden, a collision of furies that shook the heavens. Ancalagon dove with the speed of a falling mountain, jaws open, talons extended, and fire erupting like rivers of molten wrath. Vingalot surged upward, weaving through currents of wind and flame, the Silmaril casting a radiance that struck at the dragon's eyes. A hiss like the tearing of mountains rose from Ancalagon, a sound that seemed older than the world itself. Flames licked at Vingalot's hull, yet the ship held firm, guided by Eärendil's steady hand. Each flare of the Silmaril met a surge of fire. Every arc of light countered a strike of shadow. The sky was a battlefield, a vast expanse where fire and brilliance collided with a force that bent air and twisted clouds into shapes unimagined. Below, Thangorodrim trembled as if sensing its own fate intertwined with the duel above. Mountains cracked, rivers hissed, and ash fell like rain upon the lands. Even the surviving forests of Beleriand bowed before the storm, their trees bending in silent lament or awe. The world itself seemed to hold its breath, witnessing the titanic struggle unfold in the skies. Eärendil's mind raced with strategy, with the calculations of maneuver and timing. Every beat of Vingalot's wings had purpose. Every flare of the Silmaril carried intent. He struck at Ancalon's eyes and wings, daring to wound a creature of might unrivaled in all history. Yet the dragon countered with the cunning of one who had endured ages, twisting, diving, and striking with precision born of malice and pride. The heavens became a storm of fire and light. Ash swirled like living shadows, lightning sparked in the tremors of battle, and winds shrieked as if torn from the depths of the world. Eärendil felt the heat, smelled the smoke, and saw the devastation wrought in a heartbeat, yet he did not waver. With each strike, he remembered those who had fallen in the wars of the First Age, and those whose hope now rested upon his courage. At a moment when the dragon lunged with terrifying speed, Eärendil's hands moved as if guided by the stars themselves. The Silmaril flared, a concentrated beam of brilliance that struck Ancalon squarely upon the chest. Fire and light collided, and a shockwave tore through the skies, rippling across mountains and rivers alike. The dragon recoiled, a hiss of rage and pain shaking the heavens, yet his eyes burned with renewed fury. "By the Valar!" Eärendil cried, his voice cutting through the roar of wings and flame. "I will not yield." And the dragon answered, wings thrashing, fire erupting in wider torrents, claw and jaw striking for every inch of sky. Vingalot twisted and turned through the storm, Silmaril flashing like lightning, the dance of survival and defiance unfolding with a beauty and terror unmatched. For every strike that Eärendil landed, the dragon returned threefold, testing skill, courage, and the endurance of the light itself. The first clash ended not with a victor, but with the realization that this duel was beyond ordinary reckoning. Mountains had shifted, clouds were torn to tatters, and ash rained like sorrow upon the world below. Yet the light endured. The Silmaril had not dimmed, Vingalot had not faltered. Eärendil, heart pounding, eyes aflame with determination, knew the truth of what he faced. To defeat this terror would require more than skill, more than courage. It would require an unyielding spirit, a defiance that even the shadow of Morgoth could not erase. And so the dance continued, the heavens a stage for the cosmic struggle of fire and light. Each movement of dragon and ship echoed across the lands, each flare of brilliance a reminder that even in the mightiest darkness, hope could shine, and even the greatest fury could be met with courage. The duel of titans had truly begun. Chapter 4: Wings of Destruction. The skies broke open beneath the wrath of Ancalagon the Black. Flames streamed from his jaws in rivers that turned the heavens red, and smoke veiled the stars like a shroud of mourning. From wingtip to wingtip, he spanned the horizon, a living mountain of shadow and fire. Each beat of those titanic wings drew the air from the world, bending clouds and tearing the sky itself into rifts of burning wind. Below him, Beleriand trembled. The fires that fell from his flight scorched valleys and sundered hills. The shadow of his wings cast night upon plains already ruined by centuries of war. Even the sea recoiled, waves turning black with ash and boiling in the heat that poured from the dragon's descent. And yet, above the ruin, still Vingalot shone. The ship of Eärendil burned like a white star amidst the storm, the Silmaril upon his brow blazing brighter with each moment. It was not just a light, it was a defiance. Against all darkness it shone, and the fires of Morgoth could not quench it. "Come then, worm of ruin," Eärendil whispered, voice steady, eyes fixed on the shadow before him. "Let the fire meet the flame of the holy light." Ancalagon answered not with words, but with thunder. His roar split the air and sent shockwaves through the clouds. The wind became a weapon, the storm itself his ally. Lightning flared behind him as he dove, a comet of darkness, and Vingalot veered aside just as a torrent of fire struck where the ship had been. The sky boiled. Eärendil pulled hard on the silver helm, turning the prow into the wind. The Silmaril's light flared, cutting through the smoke, and for an instant the dragon faltered, the radiance piercing the haze, striking his eyes like the dawn piercing the night. But Ancalagon was no mere beast. He twisted with cunning beyond mortal ken, his tail sweeping through the air like a scythe. The blow struck Vingalot's side. The ship shuddered violently. Timbers groaned. Eärendil's grip tightened as sparks of fire danced along the rail. But the starship held. Forged by the power of the Valar and guided by hope, it would not fall so easily. "You cannot strike down the light, Dark One," he called, though the wind tore at his voice. "Your wings may shadow the world, but the heavens remember their stars." For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the dragon answered with a torrent of flame that filled the sky from horizon to horizon. The light of the Silmaril met the fire head-on, two powers ancient and opposed. The air screamed between them as fire turned white with brightness, and the ground far below was lit as if by the rising of a second sun. Those who still lived in the Westlands looked up that night and thought the world ending, for above Angband burned a light no mortal eye could endure, and the roar of the battle was heard across leagues. Ancalagon circled, his vast body casting gales that tore the clouds asunder. The scales of his hide glowed like iron in a forge, and his breath was ruin. Yet upon his brow the light of the Silmaril still shone undimmed, steady as the morning star. Then the dragon spoke, his voice deep as caverns, cruel as winter. "Your light is fleeting, mariner. It will fade as all things fade, and your flame shall be but smoke in the wind." Eärendil raised his gaze, eyes bright with fire. "Then let it fade, only after the shadow is gone." The words were not boast, but prayer, and with them he turned Vingalot upward, rising higher into the storm, drawing Ancalagon after him. The sky howled as they ascended, higher than wind or cloud, where even the breath of the world grew thin. There, above the world's edge, light and shadow clashed once more, far from the sight of elves and men. Lightning wreathed their forms. The heavens themselves seemed to fracture under their fury. And though no mortal voice could tell all that passed in that hour, the world below bore witness to its echo, the trembling of earth, the falling of mountains, and the fire that rained from above. Thangorodrim shook. The mountains that had stood since the dawn groaned under the weight of the struggle. And in that trembling, the servants of Morgoth knew fear, for the fortress of their master was quaking, and the end of all darkness might be at hand. Eärendil's strength waned, yet his heart burned brighter. He thought of Elwing, of the sons of men and elves, of the long sorrow of the world. Every heartbeat carried the hope of ages, every breath a prayer that the light not fail. And so he pressed on, even as the heat scoured his flesh and the air tore at his lungs. "Valar, guide me," he breathed, and Vingalot surged forward once more. Then came the moment when flame and light became one, when the sky turned white with brilliance and the shadow screamed. The world below thought the sun had fallen, but it was only the light of a single man standing against the last flame of Morgoth. The battle raged for 3 days and nights, though to those who watched it seemed endless. Neither fell, neither yielded, but the sky was changing, and the world below could not bear such fury much longer. And in the highest heights, where even the breath of the gods trembles, the fate of both dragon and mariner was about to be sealed. Chapter 5: The Breaking of Thangorodrim. For 3 days and nights the heavens burned. The stars themselves seemed to flee, veiled by smoke and wrath, as the last and greatest of Morgoth's servants battled the mariner of the Valar. No rest came to sky or sea. No song rose from the ruined earth. Only the roar of the dragon and the answering cry of Vingalot filled the void between heaven and world. Eärendil's arms trembled upon the helm, his lips dry as ash. His body bore wounds of fire, his mail scorched and torn, yet his eyes still gleamed with the light of the Silmaril. Every breath was pain, every motion a struggle, but still he rose higher. For below, the shadow of Angband yet lingered, and the fire of Ancalagon burned unchecked. The dragon circled, vast and terrible, his wings broken by battle, yet still mighty. Flames dripped from his jaws in molten rivers, and his breath turned air to cinders. Around him the sky was a ruin, a storm of ember and ash, the echoes of creation and destruction entwined. "Yield, mariner," thundered the voice of Ancalagon, vast and deep as the abyss. "Your light wanes. The fire of the firstborn cannot be quenched, yet even it must fade before the end. You fight for ashes and ghosts." Eärendil raised his face to the shadow towering before him. The light of the Silmaril gleamed upon his brow like the dawn. "I fight for the dawn itself," he said, his voice quiet, steady, and unyielding. Then he drew forth his spear, Aiglas, forged in the west and blessed by the Valar, its point cold and bright as starlight. Around him the winds surged, and the sea far below rose in thunderous waves as if answering his call. Vingalot turned, its sails alight with the fire of the Silmaril, and the two titans met again in the heart of the storm. The blow struck like a thunderclap. Ancalon's talons tore through air and cloud. Eärendil's spear struck deep into the scaled chest of the dragon. Fire exploded between them, a blinding light that split the heavens from the mountains to the sea. The dragon screamed, a sound so vast it shattered stone and sent avalanches tumbling down the slopes of Thangorodrim. The world trembled. Eärendil was hurled backward, his ship spinning, wings aflame. He struggled to regain control, gripping the helm with hands bleeding and raw. The dragon's shadow loomed over him again, wounded but enraged beyond measure. "You would defy me still?" Ancalagon roared, his eyes twin furnaces of ruin. "Then perish with your light." And with that, he rose to his full height, stretching his wings across the horizon, and dove. The air screamed under his fall, and his fire turned the clouds into rivers of molten gold. The full wrath of Morgoth's might bore down upon Eärendil, the force of ages of hatred unending. Eärendil closed his eyes. He thought of the foam of the sea and the voice of Elwing calling from the shores of Sirion. He thought of the tears of men and the long silence of the elves, and of the promise he had made to bring them light once more. And in that memory, strength returned. He stood upon the deck of Vingalot, lifted the Silmaril high, and cried out with all the voice that remained to him. "By the light of Aman, by the flame imperishable, I cast you down." The Silmaril flared, a light beyond reckoning, pure and eternal. The darkness broke like glass before it. Ancalagon faltered mid-dive, his wings ablaze with white fire. He screamed, and the cry was the death of an age. His form, once indomitable, twisted in agony as the light consumed him, and he fell. Down through cloud and smoke he tumbled, his body a comet of ruin. The air itself shuddered, the sea boiled, the land beneath quaked. And when he struck the towers of Thangorodrim, the mountains broke. Stones split like ice under the sun, peaks crumbled, valleys rose in waves of molten rock, and the foundations of Morgoth's fortress shuddered into ruin. The fires of Angband burst forth in rivers of flame, consuming the plain of Unfauglith and drowning it in smoke. The last bastion of the Dark Lord was undone by the fall of his greatest servant. The sky cleared slowly. Smoke thinned, the stars blinked through the haze, and silence fell across the world. Deep, awe-filled, terrible silence. Where the mountains of Thangorodrim had stood, there was now only ruin and shadow, a scar upon the face of Arda. Vingalot hovered above the desolation, its light dimmed but unbroken. Upon its deck stood Eärendil, weary beyond words. His armor blackened, his spear broken, but his eyes still shone with the fire of the Silmaril. He looked down upon the world and whispered, "It is done." And from that moment, the dominion of Morgoth began to crumble. His hosts fled into the voids of the north, and the winds carried away the last echoes of his terror. The wrath of the Valar would soon follow, and the first age would end in flame and renewal. But for now, there was only the wind and the light of one man standing against the darkness, a light that would never again be quenched. Chapter 6. The Star of Hope. When the fire at last faded and the ash began to fall, the world was hushed. All across the ruin of the north, no creature stirred, no sound rose. Only the wind moved, carrying with it the scent of stone, smoke, and sea. The mightiest of dragons was gone. His ruin lay spread upon the plain, blackened bones the size of towers. His shadow burned into the earth where Thangorodrim once had stood proud. The towers of Morgoth's power, long unbroken, were ground into dust beneath his fall. In that silence, the light of the Silmaril gleamed faintly through the fading storm, steady as the breath of dawn. High above the shattered peaks, Vingalot hovered still, a lone ship in a sky bereft of stars. Its sails were torn, its hull scorched by fire, yet its heart, bound to the holy light, endured. Eärendil stood upon the deck, leaning upon the broken helm. His hair was singed, his armor cracked, his hands blistered from flame and cold alike. He breathed the thin air with difficulty, and for a moment he thought himself alone, the last living thing in all the world. But then he looked eastward, where the sea met the horizon. The clouds parted. The first light of dawn spilled over the waters, pale and trembling, yet pure. He felt its warmth touch his face and knew in that instant that the darkness had not triumphed. The world still breathed. "Elwing," he whispered, "it is done. The shadow is broken." His voice drifted into the empty sky, and the sea seemed to answer with a low murmur, as though the world itself remembered her name. For it was her courage that had borne the Silmaril to the Valar, her love that had driven him to this final flight. And now, at the end of all struggle, that love became his only comfort. He turned his gaze downward once more. Below lay ruin, endless ruin. The fields of Anfauglith were oceans of fire. The rivers turned to steam. The mountains reduced to black scars upon the land. What had once been Beleriand now lay dying, its last breath rising in waves of mist. Eärendil felt a weight settle upon his heart. "Too much is lost," he murmured. "Too much paid for victory." Yet, in the same breath, he felt the Silmaril's light pulsing gently against his brow. It was no longer fierce. Its flame had softened into a glow like that of morning stars. The pain of its brightness no longer burned him. Instead, it seemed to speak, not in words, but in calm, silent music, as if whispering that the battle's cost was not in vain. And so he stood, silent and still, watching as the mists of ruin began to fade. Far in the west, the light of Valinor glimmered faintly beyond the horizon, the same light that had guided him through shadow and storm. A longing stirred within him, deep and wordless. For though he had won a victory greater than any before, he knew he could not return to the mortal lands. His path, like his ship, belonged now to the heavens. He looked one last time upon the world below, upon the sundered earth that had given him birth, and upon the dying embers of an age that would never come again. Then he lifted his eyes to the vault of the sky and spoke softly, as if to the wind. "If my fate is to wander the heavens, then let my light be a guide to those who remain. Let none forget what was bought with fire." As if, in answer, the Silmaril blazed once more, bright as the newborn sun. The light enveloped him, filling every crevice of Vingalot, every scar upon its timbers. The ship rose higher, carried not by wind nor wave, but by the will of the Valar who had blessed his voyage. And thus Eärendil passed beyond the circles of the world. Vingalot sailed through the veils of cloud and time, and its light became fixed in the firmament, a new star kindled above the world, a beacon against the night. The peoples of Middle-earth, waking to the dawn after the long darkness, looked up in wonder. Some named it Gil Estel, the Star of Hope. Others called it the Flame of the West, for it burned with the fire of the Blessed Realm. To the elves, it was a promise that light would never wholly depart from Arda. To men, a sign that courage endures beyond despair. And though ages would pass, and kingdoms rise and fall, the star remained, steadfast, unchanging, eternal. The Silmaril that once blazed upon Eärendil's brow now shone upon all who lifted their eyes in hope. So ended the Battle of the Titans, and with it the First Age drew to its close. But from its ashes was born a light that even Morgoth could not extinguish, the memory of a mariner who defied the darkness and was set among the stars as a guardian of all who wander beneath their glow. And when weary hearts looked to the night and saw that single steadfast flame, they remembered that even in the deepest shadow, light endures. Chapter 7. The Legacy of Light. In the ages that followed, the fires of the First Age dimmed into legend. The seas rose, the lands were reshaped, and Beleriand was swallowed by the waves. Only the memory of its glories and its sorrows lingered in the songs of the Eldar. Yet above the ever-changing world, one light remained unaltered, the star of Eärendil, shining in the west, untouchable, unfailing, eternal. Men first beheld it from the newly formed shores of Middle-earth and trembled, for they had lived long in the shadow of Morgoth's ruin, and in their hearts lay fear that darkness might return. But when the bright star appeared, their fear softened, replaced by awe. They gave it names. Some called it the flame of the sea, others the crown of the sky. To the wise, it was the herald of a promise, that even after the mightiest evils fall, hope endures, far beyond the reach of ruin. To the elves, its light was memory. In the quiet of their havens, the Noldor and Sindar would sing of Eärendil, the blessed mariner who found the path to Valinor and pleaded for the world. They knew that his voyage had purchased their deliverance, and that in his triumph and loss lay the mingling of fates, elf and man, forever bound by his blood. Sometimes, upon calm nights, when the sea was still and the horizon wide, elven mariners would lift their eyes and whisper a prayer. Gil Estel, guide us. And though none could say whether the star heard, the waves often quieted, and the winds gentled, as if the mariner still watched over those who sailed the waters he once braved. Among men, the memory of Eärendil grew into legend. In the kingdoms that rose after the drowning of Beleriand, in Numenor, the Isle of Gift, his star was revered as a sign of the Valar's favor. The kings of Numenor bore the star upon their banners, and their ships set sail guided by its silver light. And though pride would one day lead that realm to ruin, still the mariners of the faithful would whisper his name before embarking on their voyages, trusting that his light would lead them safely through shadow and storm. So his legacy wove itself through time, unseen but ever present, a thread of light binding the ages. When the days of Numenor ended in wrath and the world was bent, the star did not fall. It remained fixed above the sea, and the survivors who reached Middle-earth once more took heart from its radiance. They said that when all other lights were lost, Eärendil's would shine still, for it had been blessed by the Valar and kindled in the pure fire of the Silmaril. Thus it was that when Sauron rose anew in the east, and the hearts of men and elves grew weary of the long fight, they still looked to that star and remembered the mariner who defied the shadow of Morgoth himself. And long after, in an age far removed, when the ring-bearer and his companions wandered through shadow and despair, it was that same light, the light of Eärendil's Silmaril, that shone once more in the phial of Galadriel. It pierced the darkness of Shelob's lair, and it gave courage to Frodo in the very heart of Mordor. Though Eärendil himself could not walk the earth, his light touched it still, guiding, protecting, and reminding all that no shadow is everlasting. Even in the undying lands, it is said, the Eldar gaze upon that star and remember the one who bridged the world of the mortal and the divine, who bore the burdens of both and found redemption for all. So the tale endures of the mariner who rose from mortal shores, carried a Silmaril into the sky, and became a light for every wanderer beneath the heavens. And though ages pass and the tongues of men change, the meaning of his light does not. It is the promise that every darkness will end and every shadow give way to dawn. It is the unspoken hope in every heart that lifts its eyes to the night sky and finds courage there. For above all the ruin of time, one star still burns, steady, watchful, eternal, the last flame of the Silmaril, the light of Eärendil the Blessed, the star of hope. Thus ends the tale of the Battle of Titans, the fall of Ancalagon, the triumph of Eärendil, and the kindling of a light that outlived the First Age and all that came after. Before the next age's songs are sung, take a moment to breathe this memory of Arda's ancient days. And if you wish to hear more tales of Valinor's glory, of the fall of Numenor, or the wars that shaped Middle-earth, stay with us. For many lights yet shine in the long story of the world. Until the next telling, may Eärendil's light guide your path through the shadow.